live in interesting times.
For the headlines.
The Miami-based National Hurricane Center said in its 5 p.m. bulletin that another weather system in the Atlantic is expected to become a tropical storm and bring strong winds and heavy rainfall to the northwest hurricane-stricken Bahamas in the next 36 hours.
The death toll from torrential rains and floods in southeastern Spain rose to 3 on Friday after a man drowned when his car became trapped in a tunnel.
An earthquake that struck east of the Philippine capital Manila on Friday set buildings swaying and sent scores into the streets.
And UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres launched the United Nations Plan of Action to safeguard religious sites around the world in the face of growing attacks on places of worship.
Amama Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world, thank you very much for joining us.
We welcome our viewers here in the Philippines and around the world. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Sept.
And now to the news. Some 1,300 people are still unaccounted for in the Bahamas following Hurricane Dorian, according to officials, down from the 2,500 previously reported. The Bahamian National Emergency Management Agency, or NEMA, attributed the drop to cross-referencing names of missing persons with those in shelters. It's very fluid, according to NEMA spokesman Carl Smith. He told this to the reporters at a press conference in Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas. The Bahamian authorities have put the death toll from the devastating Category 5 storm at 50 so far. But they've said they expect that number to rise significantly, and a former prime minister said he feared the final toll could be in the hundreds. Bahamian Police Commissioner Anthony Ferguson was asked at the press conference about the search for victims of the storm. He said it's a slow process and we have to go through all of that rubble, take our time and search. He also said it's going to take a long time before you can really say the final numbers. Search operations could be impacted by approaching weather.
The Miami-based National Hurricane Center said in its 5 o'clock p.m. bulletin that a weather system in the Atlantic was expected to become a tropical storm and bring strong winds and heavy rainfall to the northeast Bahamas in the next 36 hours. After the Bahamas, the storm appears to be on a path towards the central Florida coast. The forecast models varied widely and could change. Tropical warning issued by the Bahamian government was in effect for the island of the northwestern Bahamas, including the Abacos, Berry Islands, Bimini, Eleuthera, Grand Bahama, as well as New Providence. In Florida, the areas most likely to experience tropical storm force winds are from Palm Beach County on to the north. There is still a 10% to 30% chance additional parts of South Florida would be affected. A tropical storm watch was issued for portions of the coast of east central Florida from Jupiter Inlet northward to the Volusia Brevard County line at 11 p.m. South Florida could see tropical storm force winds as early as Friday evening, with conditions improving by Saturday night.
To Spain now, the death toll from the torrential rains and floods in the southeastern part of the country rose to 3 on Friday after a man drowned when his car became trapped in a tunnel. Take a look. The latest tragedy occurred in the city of Almeria when the tunnel was flooded by a huge amount of water in a few minutes, according to Almeria City Hall in a tweet. A policeman managed to rescue 2 of the 3 people in the vehicle, but 1 occupant remained inside the car. Almeria Mayor Ramon Fernandez Pacheco told Radio Cadena Ser. Almeria Airport was closed on Friday due to flooding caused by the heavy rain, which was making it difficult for passengers and workers to reach it. Just under 1 million passengers passed through the facility last year. The emergency services said a 61-year-old man and his 51-year-old sister died on Thursday when their vehicle was swept away as fast-moving water swamped a road in Caudete, a municipality around 100 kilometers southwest of the port city of Valencia. Now, elsewhere, officials said the rain caused chaos on the roads, cutting public transport and prompting rivers to burst their banks, flooding homes and forcing the evacuation of surrounding areas. Schools across the region were suspended and for Friday and for the second day as the heavy rains are set to continue.
An earthquake that struck east of the Philippine capital Manila on Friday set buildings swaying and sent scores into the streets, but authorities said they did not expect any damage. The 5.2 magnitude jolt hit offshore and near sparsely populated Polillo Island, about 130 kilometers, or that's 80 miles from Manila, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. Buildings in the capital were briefly evacuated and trains halted while crews looked for any damage as several smaller aftershocks rumbled through the ground. Renato Solidum, director of the nation's Seismology Institute, said, and I quote, "This is a moderate-sized earthquake and we don't expect damage so far based on the intensity reports that we received," told CNN Philippines. The Philippines is in the Pacific Ring of Fire, an arc of intense seismic activity that stretches from quake-prone Japan through Southeast Asia and across the Pacific Basin.
Twelve people drowned in a lake in central India on Friday morning when their boats capsized during a religious ceremony. Take a look. The boats carrying 20 to 25 people tipped over in the early hours in Bhopal as they were about to immerse an idol of the Hindu elephant Ganesha. 12 bodies have been retrieved so far, and the search is on for 1 more person, according to the National Disaster Response Force in a statement. Now, this week marks the end of the Ganesh Chaturthi festival, also known as the Vinayaka Chaturthi, when colorfully decorated idols of Ganesha are immersed in water.
Frontrunner Joe Biden went on the offensive Thursday in the third Democratic debate of the 2020 White House race, clashing with top rivals on the fraught issue of health care in America and brushing off attacks from lesser challengers. Former Vice President Joe Biden, U.S. Senators Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren, South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, former U.S. Representative Beto O'Rourke, former U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Julian Castro, and entrepreneur Andrew Yang took the stage during the one-night event hosted by ABC News in partnership with Univision in Houston, Texas. First, the healthcare.
I know that the senator says she's for Bernie. Well, I'm for Barack. I think the Obamacare worked. My plan for health care costs a lot of money. It costs $740 billion. It doesn't cost $30 trillion. $3.4 trillion a year, it turns out, is twice what the entire federal budget is.
We just need to be clear about what Medicare for All is all about. Instead of paying premiums into insurance companies and then having insurance companies build their profits by saying no to coverage, we're going to do this by saying everyone is covered by Medicare for All. Every health care provider is covered. And the only question here in terms of difference is where to send the bill.
And while Bernie wrote the bill, I read the bill. And on page 8 of the bill, it says that we will no longer have private insurance as we know it. And that means that 149 million Americans will no longer be able to have their current insurance. That's in 4 years. I don't think that's a bold idea. I think it's a bad idea.
Covered. He wanted every single person in this country covered. My plan would do that. Your plan would not.
They do not have to buy in. They do not have to buy in.
You just said that. You just said that 2 minutes ago. You just said 2 minutes ago that they would have to buy in. You said they would have to buy in.
Have to buy in. If she qualifies for Medicaid,
are you forgetting what you said 2 minutes ago?
Are you
forgetting already what you said just 2 minutes ago? I mean, I can't believe that you said 2 minutes ago that they had to buy in, and now you're saying they don't have to buy. You're forgetting that.
I said anyone.
Meanwhile, on gun violence, Thursday's debate was the first since a series of mass shootings last month, including one in El Paso, Texas, in which 22 people were killed. Now, since that shooting and others, presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke, who is from El Paso, has been one of the most vocal candidates about it. And he declared his intention to take away AR-15s and AK-47s. Again, let's listen in.
People asked me in El Paso, they said, you know, because I have a long-standing record on this issue, they said, well, do you think Trump is responsible for what happened? And I said, well, look, I mean, obviously he didn't pull the trigger, but he's certainly been tweeting out the ammunition.
You said, quote, Americans who own AR-15s and AK-47s will have to sell them to the government, all of them. You know the critics call this confiscation. Are you proposing taking away their guns, and how would this work?
I am, if it's a weapon that was designed to kill people on a battlefield.
I'm sorry that it had to take issues coming to my neighborhood or personally affecting Beto to suddenly make us demand change. This is a crisis of empathy in our nation. We are never going to solve this crisis if we have to wait for it to personally affect us or our neighborhood or our community before we demand action. You want to know how we get this done? We get this done by having a more courageous empathy where people don't wait for this hell to visit upon their communities.
Well, Senator Warren said that in order to pass meaningful gun legislation, the Senate must roll back the filibuster.
The question we need to ask is, when we've got this much support across the country, 90% of Americans want to see us do, I like registration, want to see us do background checks, want to get assault weapons off the streets. Why doesn't it happen? And the answer is corruption, pure and simple. We have a Congress that is beholden to the gun industry. And unless we're willing to address that head on and roll back the filibuster, we're not going to get anything done on guns.
Senator Biden, meanwhile, argued that it was unconstitutional to take guns away from people.
Those proposals I put forward for the president had over 50% of members of the NRA supporting them, and overwhelmingly the rest of the people supporting them. Now the numbers are much higher because they realize what I've been saying and we've all been saying is correct.
The debate moved to immigration while Julian Castro calls out Joe Biden's stance on immigration during his tenure as vice president. Andrew Yang distances himself from Donald Trump, saying to immigrants, come to America. Pete Buttigieg also expresses how embracing immigration helped his hometown grow.
You didn't answer the question.
Well,
the question
I
is,
did
did you
answer the
make
question.
did you make a mistake with those deportations?
The president did the best thing that was able to be done at the
How about
time.
you?
I'm the vice president of the United States.
Every time something good about Barack Obama comes up, he says, oh, I was there, I was there, I was there. That's me too. And then every time somebody questions part of the administration that we were both part of, he says, well, that was the president. I mean, he wants to take credit for Obama's work, but not have to answer to any questions.
Immigrants are positive for our economic and social dynamism. And I would return the level of legal immigration to the point it was under the Obama-Biden administration. I think we have to compete for talent, and I am the opposite of Donald Trump in many ways. He says build a wall. I'm going to say to immigrants, come to America, because if you come here, your son or daughter can run for president. The water is great, and this is where you want to build a company, build a family, and build a life. This country has been a magnet for human capital for generations. If we lose that, we lose something integral to our continued success.
My plan for revitalizing the economies of rural America includes community renewal visas that would allow cities and towns and counties that are hurting not only for jobs but for population to embrace immigration as we have in my city. You know, the only reason that South Bend is growing right now, after years of shrinking, is immigration. It's one of the reasons we acted, not waiting for Washington, to create city-issued municipal IDs so that people, regardless of immigration status, in our city had the opportunity to have the benefits of identification.
To other news now, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres launched the United Nations Plan of Action to safeguard religious sites during an informal briefing to member states at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Guterres told delegates that houses of worship around the world must be safe havens for reflection and peace and not sites of bloodshed and terror.
Houses of worship around the world must be safe havens for reflection and peace, not sites of bloodshed and terror. People everywhere must be allowed to observe and practice their faith in peace. In situations of armed conflict, buildings dedicated to religion are specifically protected by international humanitarian law. And intentional attacks against such buildings is a war crime.
The plan intends to be a result-oriented document that can provide better preparedness and response to possible attacks against religious sites. The success of the plan will rest on the implementation and on the sustained commitment by all stakeholders, and in particular member states, to work actively in the safeguard of religious sites in collaboration with relevant actors.
The United Nations Plan of Action provides an action-oriented framework with recommendations to support relevant stakeholders, including member states, religious leaders, civil society organizations, the news media, and social media platforms in preventing attacks against places of worship and guaranteeing the safety of the faithful to worship in peace.
Our world is plagued with a surge in anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim hatred, attacks against Christians and other religious groups. In recent months alone, Jews have been murdered in synagogues, Muslims gunned down in mosques, Christians killed at prayer. I once again condemn these attacks in the strongest possible terms. Religious sites should be places of worship, not places of war.
Presidential spokesperson Salvador Panelo said President Duterte is not setting aside the ruling of the Permanent Court of Arbitration on the West Philippine Sea in favor of a joint oil and gas exploration with China. In a media interview on Tuesday, that's September 10, President Duterte was quoted saying, and I quote, the exclusive economic zone is part of the arbitral ruling which we will ignore to come up with an economic activity. Panelo also denied that Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. refuted the president when he said that China has never made, has never made ignoring the arbitral ruling a prerequisite to come up with a joint exploration. Panelo pointed out that what President Duterte meant was that he was opting not to confront China about the arbitral ruling immediately. Let's listen in.
He did not say that Philippines will drop the claim. What, as he said, the arbitral ruling is still subject to peaceful talks. Yan ang ibig sabihin nun. In other words, impasse pa eh. Kaya hayaan mo muna sila mag-usap. He's not refuting actually the president. No. By that he means pinag-uusapan pa rin peacefully, kumbaga hindi kino-confront immediately. Nag-uusap pa rin kung how to resolve it. Relationship between the two countries is not measured by the conflict in the West Philippine Sea alone.
Going now to the Hong Kong protests, Natasha Kassam from the Sydney-based think tank, the Lowy Institute, reflects on 100 days of the protests in Hong Kong. September 16 will mark 100 days since demonstrations began in the key financial hub against a proposed China extradition bill, which has since been declared withdrawn by the city's leader. The sometimes violent demonstrations have snowballed into wider calls for democracy and police accountability. Again, let's listen in.
Well, I do think the first achievement is that we are at 100 days of protest. I don't think anybody would have expected that or seen that this would escalate to the point it has. I really think that one of the key achievements has been to mobilize so many different elements of Hong Kong society. It's fairly unusual to see protesters that include lawyers or accountants alongside activists and students. I also think they've managed to attract the attention of the world on Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong has always been an international city, but for commercial reasons, and nobody really expected it to turn into a center of such political crises.
Now, she was asked on how the Hong Kong government has handled things.
There's certainly the issues that have been seen with the Hong Kong police force, or some of those police that have been disproportionate in their use of force. Images of police tackling high school students to the ground. I mean, that is something that is being beamed around the world and reflects, I think, a government that is insecure and potentially unable to deal with this sort of a situation. Carrie Lam told that gathering that she doesn't know what policy levers are available to get the public back on side. And this is, I think, symptomatic of a broader issue where even though the political elites and the business classes of Hong Kong have been co-opted by Beijing and are very much beholden to Beijing, the majority of the population of Hong Kong are now disillusioned and disengaged from mainland China.
Asked if she sees a way out of all these, here's what she said.
Well, I think one of the things about the way in which that the protests have escalated so quickly and in a way that was unexpected to Beijing and to, I think, the rest of the world is that it makes it much harder for there to be an off-ramp. I really think that it's going to be much more difficult to diffuse than anybody would have expected. You know, at this stage, I think it is very unlikely that the Hong Kong government would compromise on the other demands that the protesters have put forward. Of course, I could be surprised. I've been surprised by a lot in this movement, but I am not particularly optimistic about that. And I would suggest that the behavior of the protesters suggests that they're also not particularly optimistic about the outcomes of their demands. So then you have to consider what options are there for Beijing in this. The protests at the moment are a big problem for them, especially given the state of the economy, especially given the ongoing trade war and the other risks in the Chinese system. I think they can choose to continue to do what they're doing, which is to drive a wedge between the more radical protesters and the rest of the Hong Kong population. They can continue to try to rely on the city's elites to present a more positive image of one country, two systems, and hope that that message is more effective than that of the protesters. They could potentially do more to increase the capacity of the Hong Kong police and try to provide them with more resources and training even. So there are many things they could do before they send the People's Armed Police in to quash this. And I do think that they will look to exhaust all of those options first.
One of Hong Kong's most prestigious sporting tournaments on Friday became the latest victim of the huge protests convulsing the city as a growing roster of events and entertainment acts pull out of the financial hub. Organizers of the WTA Hong Kong Open Women's Tennis Tournament said they were postponing next month's competition because of the present situation after months of sometimes violent pro-democracy protests. Hong Kong's protests were triggered by alarm over a controversial bill since scrapped to allow extraditions to mainland China. Millions of people have taken part in demonstrations over the last 3 months, which have morphed into calls for democracy and complaints against the erosion of freedoms under Beijing's rule. Street battles between riot police and small groups of hardcore protesters have become a weekly occurrence, hammering the already struggling economy and undermining the city's reputation for stability. In recent weeks, a growing number of stars have cancelled or postponed events, from prominent K-pop acts such as Daniel Kang and GOT7 to the popular US-based comedian Trevor Noah. A large global wellness summit also moved its location to Singapore because of the unrest.
Mixed feelings because I know they're fighting for something, but I love Hong Kong and it's kind of sad to see it in this position. So,
you know, that they're fighting for their freedoms and their democracy, and I care about that, so I support them in what they're doing, so long as everybody's safe. We're slightly inconvenienced sometimes, but that's okay.
I'm so scared also, even not affected, right? Because of the surrounding, right? Doing something else, burning like that, MTR blows like that, always like that. Then very scared.
Well, in a sense, it does affect my life because I live in TST, so obviously to come back home I need to take the MTR. And sometimes it just gets closed and I want to take a cab and the cab doesn't want to take me to TST because they're thinking it's too dangerous, like it's supposed to be the border. But except that, not that much. I still feel very safe here.
The cancellations are compounding misery for the city's tourism sector, which has been battered by the protests. On year, tourist arrivals fell by 40% in August. The city's financial secretary, Paul Chan, revealed this month, with hotel occupancy rates down by around half, causing knock-on impacts on the retail and dining sectors.
The British Home Office released its latest statistics showing that 1.5 million EU residents in the UK have already applied to the EU settlement scheme in order to get residency status after Brexit. Take a look. But while the government had promised that the process would be easy and that every EU resident would be allowed to stay, some of them are experiencing difficulties and see their right to a permanent residency status denied. Dutch lawyer Bina Gayadin, resident in the UK for 20 years, is one of them. And she had to send dozens of documents and insist on recognition of her right to stay.
I went along with the system and provided 60 pages of bank statements and 5 years of council tax. Within 20 minutes, I got a message saying, "Thank you for your message. Your records are not sufficient to show you've been here for 5 years." And it's like, I don't know where to go now. I mean, what else than the information you've identified in your own list can I show? It seems unbelievable that the computer and all the checks that the government could make would come back to say that people like me don't exist. It's not something you would expect. So there will be people who do not have national insurance number, children in care. I mean, there's lots of people who will end up with a denial when they ask for settled status. I live in a house with 4 people, my husband and 2 children, and I'm the one singled out, whereas I've lived here longer than my 10-year-old daughter. So why me, not her? Or, why me? And I felt kind of picked on, and it's like, well, I'm treated differently, even though as an EU citizen I should not be discriminated against. And I felt, in a way, discriminated because of the way I had to provide evidence that others do not have to provide.
What concerns me looking at the figures is that, okay, almost 300,000 people applied last month, but from those people, a third, so almost 100,000, have their application in the backlog. So there's a backlog of almost 200,000 applications. This means cases that are not solved so far, that people haven't gotten their status because of various reasons. The bottom line is everyone was promised the same. So just saying, oh well, the majority of people are fine because they had a straightforward record, or they didn't, it didn't take too long for the applications to be completed. It's not, it's not really the point, because everyone has to be fine, because everyone was actually promised the same rights, and this is what was promised.
French officials launched Thursday their first dress rehearsal of new customs checks that will be imposed if Britain crashes out of the EU without an exit deal, a scenario that could severely crimp the flow of people and goods across the English Channel. France's Budget Minister Gérald Darmanin was on hand at the Normandy port of Ouistreham near the D-Day beaches stormed by Allied forces in 1944 for the early morning arrival of the ferry from Portsmouth. He said France was ready, but he said he remained a bit worried about how the British are preparing, as the government of Prime Minister Boris Johnson published alarming documents warning of Brexit queues and disruption.
La France est prête. Elle aurait été prête au mois de mars, elle est encore plus prête aujourd'hui fin octobre. Ces démonstrations, ces tests le montrent. Et il faut désormais que nos amis anglais puissent nous dire comment ils se sont préparés pour accueillir effectivement une séparation juridique entre eux et l'Europe.
A no-deal Brexit is possible on October 31, meaning France will have to start inspections on a wide range of goods arriving from Britain for the first time in 46 years.
The news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Tungkulin ng MTRCV ang mag-provide na appropriate
I am Teacher Sally, and this is Kid Kwento, one of Net25 Kids' online shows. Kid Kwento is now on TV. You can watch us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 4 to 4:30 p.m. Also watch Anong Sa Inyo with Ate DJ every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 to 4:30 p.m. Sa Kid Kwento, ang aming motto ay, let's all read to succeed! Hooray! Kita-kita tayo ha! Bye-bye!
Landmarks, Linggo, alas 6 hanggang alas 7 ng gabi.
Agriculture Secretary William Dar on Thursday ordered the National Food Authority to bring down rice prices to 27 pesos per kilo by flooding Metro Manila markets with 3.6 million bags of the food staple. He also directed the agency to increase palay support price to 19 pesos from 17 pesos per kilo. The agriculture chief said the NFAC decided for the NFA to flood Metro Manila markets and other key cities nationwide with imported NFA rice. Dar said the NFA rice will be sold at 25 pesos per kilogram wholesale and 27 pesos per kilogram retail. He also said when sold at retail price of 27 pesos per kilo, the 3.6 million 50-kilogram bags would amount to 4.86 billion pesos, which the NFA can readily use to procure from farmers. And Dar said the 2 pesos increase in palay price support could translate to 8,000 pesos additional income per farmer based on current national average yield of 4 tons per hectare.
British Airways has cancelled all its scheduled UK flights for September 27, when company pilots will again strike in a long-running row over pay. It comes after the carrier cancelled all flights departing and arriving in the UK on Monday and Tuesday, owing to BA's first strike by pilots in the company's 100-year history. In a statement released late Thursday, BA called on the British Airline Pilots Association, or BALPA union, to call off their strike and return to negotiations. The airline added, "We are very sorry that BALPA's actions will affect thousands more travel plans." This week's strike sparked travel chaos for about 200,000 passengers, mostly using London's Gatwick and Heathrow airports. BALPA estimates that the 48-hour strike cost the airline £80 million, or that's 89 million euros. But BA has yet to provide a figure.
Meanwhile, Democratic presidential candidates taking part in the third round of debates lay into President Trump over his handling of trade with China. Take a look.
We've got a guy in the White House who has been erratic on trade policy. He conducts trade policy by tweet, frankly born out of his fragile ego. It has resulted in farmers in Iowa with soybeans rotting in bins, looking at bankruptcy. When we look at this issue, my trade policy under a Harris administration is always going to be about saying we need to export American products, not American jobs.
Trump obviously hasn't a clue. Trump thinks that trade policy is a tweet at 3 o'clock in the morning. What we have got to do is develop a trade policy that represents workers, represents the farmers in the Midwest and elsewhere who are losing billions right now because of Trump's policy.
Well, the president clearly has no strategy. You know, when I first got into this race, I remember President Trump scoffed and said he'd like to see me making a deal with Xi Jinping. I'd like to see him making a deal with Xi Jinping. Is it just me, or was that supposed to happen in, like, April? It's one more example of a commitment not made.
And yes, we want fair trade, but we must work with the rest of the world. And he has made a mockery of focused trade policy, which I think means enforcement, like we've done in northern Minnesota, passing bills, getting President Obama to do more on that, so that our workers can benefit. So we are exporting goods and making sure that is a competitive policy where our goal is that we are making things, inventing things, and exporting to the world. He is defeating that goal.
So the imbalances are real, but we have to let the Chinese know that we recognize that President Trump has pursued an arbitrary and haphazard trade policy that has had victims on both sides. So no to repealing the tariffs immediately, but yes to making sure we come to a deal that addresses the concerns of American companies and American producers.
I agree with those who have said that this erratic, haphazard trade war is hurting American families. As Senator Klobuchar said, 300,000 American jobs. It's estimated that it's cost $600 to the average American family. Just a couple of days ago, 60% of Americans said that they believe that we're in for a recession next year. So when I become president, I would immediately begin to negotiate with China to ratchet down that trade war. We have leverage there.
Our trade policy in America has been broken for decades, and it has been broken because it works for giant multinational corporations and not for much of anyone else.
U.S. internet giant Google has agreed a settlement totaling 965 million euros, or that's $1.7 billion, to end a tax dispute in France under an agreement announced in court on Thursday. The company will pay a fifth of 500 million euro fine for tax evasion, as well as a further 465 million euros to settle claims with French tax authorities. In a statement, Google confirmed the settlement and hailed the fact it had put an end to fiscal differences that it had with France for numerous years. The settlement follows similar out-of-court agreements reached by Google in Italy and Britain in recent years, though the French agreement is much larger than the previous ones. Google used a measure known as the double Irish. Initially, Google funneled European sales through a shell corporation based in Ireland, which is in turn controlled by an offshore company. The U.S. considered the company's European operations to be tax registered in Ireland with no U.S. tax payable, while Ireland considered it to be resident in the offshore company, meaning no tax due there either. In that way, Google paid almost no tax on its European sales up until 2014. The settlement comes as France and its European allies seek to find common ground with the United States in a long-running dispute over the taxation of digital giants. The British government is now planning a similar move at a time when it also hopes to build on its relationship with Washington as it exits the European Union. Eagle News International will be right back. Stay tuned.
Mga kamag-anak, kaibigan at kababayan po namin sa Middle East and North Africa, masayang balita ang hatid po namin sa inyo. Ang Net25 ay makakasama nyo na sa inyong mga tahanan. Mapapanood nyo na ang inyong mga paboritong programa sa pamamagitan ng OSN, ang pinakamalaking entertainment network sa buong rehiyon. Sa Channel 725, maihahatid na namin sa inyo ang mga pangunahing balita at mahahalagang impormasyon. Kaya makisaya, makisalo tuwing umaga at panoorin ang mga programa ng mga hinahangaang celebrities and OPM artists, same day as the Philippines. You can also watch Net25 live and on demand anytime, anywhere on any mobile device on OSN Play. Kaya tawag na sa OSN to learn more on how to get Net25. Sa Net25 on OSN, siguradong at home ka dito.
A rare phenomenon causing the strongest Antarctic warming on record is set to deliver more pain to drought-stricken Australia, according to scientists. The unusual event known as sudden stratospheric warming started in the last week of August when the atmosphere above Antarctica began heating rapidly. Scientists at Australia's Bureau of Meteorology said in a report. It also said the Bureau of Meteorology is predicting the strongest Antarctic warming on record, likely to exceed the previous record of September 2002. The upper atmosphere above the South Pole has heated up from close to -70 to about -25 degrees Celsius, according to Bureau climatologist Andrew Watkins. He said it has leaped up more than 40 degrees warmer than normal in the course of 3 weeks. Watkins also said the uncommon occurrence was not believed to be linked to global warming. The occurrence is triggered by a mix of disturbances in weather patterns closer to the ground. Sudden stratospheric warming is common in the northern hemisphere, but has only been recorded on one other occasion in 2002 in the southern hemisphere.
Tokyo 2020 organizers blasted volunteers with fake snow on Friday as they trial ever more extreme ways to beat the heat ahead of the games. But instead of the light, fluffy snowflakes, the crowd, consisting mainly of Tokyo 2020 staff, was pelted with fairly coarse shards of shaved ice at the canoeing test event. And ironically, after several weeks of almost unbroken heat and humidity, Friday saw temperatures in the Japanese capital drop sharply, no doubt a relief to millions of Tokyo commuters and players training for the forthcoming Rugby World Cup. One problem became immediately apparent after the volunteers were doused in 300 kilograms of snow in a matter of minutes. The spectators were quickly soaked through and the floor became slippery.
この案はですね、実は8月の中旬ぐらいに出てきた案でございまして、で組織委員会としましては暑さ対策としてできることは全て試してみようという特設ではですね、およそ300キロの氷をですね、これ食用にもなる氷でございますが、これを砕いて撒いたということで、空気全体を冷やすというほどのものではございませんで、どちらかというとお客様に直接この氷が当たって、この氷のかけらが当たって清涼感を与えるという、そういう。
Tokyo 2020 organizers have largely won praise for their preparations for the games. With the construction work on track, IOC President Thomas Bach has said Tokyo is the best prepared host ever with less than a year to go until the opening ceremony. But the sweltering Tokyo heat has already proved a headache, and there are fears for athletes, volunteers, and spectators if conditions in the recent summers are repeated at games time.
The UN Health Agency has joined forces with the European Union to tackle the spread of vaccine-preventable diseases and confront the spread of misinformation about inoculations. Speaking at the first Global Vaccination Summit in Brussels, World Health Organization Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said that 1 in 10 children fails to get the essential jabs they need. Together with EU President Jean-Claude Juncker, Tedros called for governments and partners to invest in immunization as a right for all. Take a look.
Ainsi, alors que dans certaines parties du monde, des êtres humains meurent faute de vaccin, ici, des personnes risquent leur vie et celle des autres en les refusant. Certains ne jouent pas le jeu de la prévention et préfèrent jouer avec le feu.
Falsehoods about vaccination have spread in developed countries in Europe, the US, Canada, and others, but also in less developed countries like Pakistan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, jeopardizing the fight against polio, Ebola, and other vaccine-preventable diseases. The recent announcements by Pinterest and Facebook that they will direct users to accurate and reliable information about vaccines is very welcome and a great start. But more needs to be done, and we hope they will do more.
The initiative comes amid the resurgence of preventable diseases, notably measles, which has seen infection rates surge above levels not seen since 2006. In the past 3 years, 7 countries have lost their measles elimination status, including 4 in the European region, according to WHO. The agency also has declared people's hesitancy about vaccines one of the 10 key threats to global health. According to a Eurobarometer survey in April, almost 1 in 2 people in the EU believe that some jabs often produce serious side effects.
Here now is a feature from our Micronesia correspondent, Iris Dale Redam, on a lesson-filled in-center stage play that was recently presented by members of the Iglesia Ni Cristo Church of Christ in the island territory of Guam. Watch this.
Produced by members of the Iglesia Ni Cristo Church of Christ in Micronesia through In-Center Stage, the theatrical play Back Into Your Arms was presented before a live audience at the iconic Guam Museum.
You have a bunch of people watching you, and usually we'd have like EVMs or like AT Humanity stuff, something we would do to, give to the community, but I guess we're just kind of like entertaining, which is good. It's still good because then we still have a little bit of a life lesson in it.
I try to practice stage presence, and I try to think about what I can do as a person with no lines to try to express myself without saying anything, but through physical motions.
Basically, I had to memorize all the scenes to make sure all the props go in the right places so the actors can use it to the full advantage.
When I was told that my daughter and my son is included in the cast, I was so nervous, me as the father, because I don't know if they could be able to cope up with the practice.
I know that the kids have worked really, really hard to really give us something to be inspired by, to be uplifted by, to be edified. So today I just expect to really be moved by the great and amazing talents of these young kids who have really labored so hard to give us something to really be inspired by.
The story follows a young boy named Charlie in his efforts to help his mom, Nita, who is also a single mother. Beset with financial strains, Nita is determined to be strong for her son and to raise him to be God-fearing. Yet, like most parents, she does her best not to let Charlie see her in distress. Her precocious son's tenacity soon gets the best of him and is tested in his steadfastness to always do what is right. In a twist of events, the naive Charlie finds himself exposed to a band of children different from him. Portrayed through memorable characters, a clear distinction is made between Charlie and the other children. Separated from his mother, he experiences loneliness and sadness, but still, he holds on to his beliefs and values.
He tries selling his toys to little kids who are homeless, which he does not know, so he ends up having to follow them and then gets himself in a really tight situation to the point where he just doesn't want to be there. He is not having it right now. He just wants to go home.
Despite being young of age, having little or no experience in public speaking or stage acting, most of the cast members felt surprised about how they performed that night.
The play was a very fun thing to do. I had great. Everyone had great. I hope we do this again sometime.
I don't have much of a role, honestly, but I have one line. But I know the power of that one line, so...
What is this one line?
My one line is, be strong, Nita. We're here for you. Don't lose hope because God will never leave you.
My role in the play was as Charlie, who was kidnapped and tricked and is also the main character. I feel excited and I want to do it again. I feel really shocked because it's my first time experiencing this. I've only performed in musical performances.
I think it benefits me because I get to really see how everybody works together, and I get to learn how everybody has this story to share. And when we work together and we start talking to each other, it helps us to learn more about each other, and we have this stronger bond and a stronger faith with God.
Meanwhile, parents express their joy to watch their children perform on a live stage.
So that makes me very proud and happy, Dad, knowing that my children will be part of the activities for the celebration of the victorious and dynamic leadership of Brother Eduardo V. Manalo.
On behalf of all the brethren in the Ecclesiastical District of Micronesia, we would like to greet our beloved Executive Minister, Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, on occasion of his 10th anniversary of his dynamic leadership as the Executive Minister in the Church of Christ.
Happy anniversary, po! We love you,
po! Reporting from the island of Guam, I'm Irish Del Redam for Eagle News. 1 with 25.
Thank you, Irish Dale.
Thank you, Irisdale. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr. Also check out our boards and Pinterest and pictures on Instagram. I'm Sam Sept. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Alma Angeles and we're 1 with 25.